Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights here with Rich Klein. We're going to talk about a little bit of a good old days in the sense we're going to remember a couple of fallen comrades who've preceded us and passed away 3, 4, 7 years ago in a couple of cases, Ernie Montella and Mike Gallela. Smiling faces that we saw when we hit the show circuit on the East Coast, but especially in Philadelphia. I think they both were from that rough area. Actually, it is a rough area around there, but that's another matter. We'll talk about that and other things. But thanks, sponsors. Topps Panini Upper Deck, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, and Burbank Sports Cards. So welcome, Rich.
Thanks, Jim.
You and I will talk about the titles of these episodes, and then I don't know that we wing it because we're really talking from personal experience. But Ernie Montella and Mike Gallela, I remember them being two of the more upbeat guys that we would see when we went to Philadelphia for those really outstanding shows in that area. 2-3 times a year. We didn't go every single time, but it was a mainstay on the show circuit.
I did, in some way or another, a lot of those shows in the 80s. When I came to work for you in 1990, I basically didn't go for many years. We had Mike Hirsch at the time.
Exactly.
And since Mike Hirsch's parents had great tables there, and I think I talked about this on John Newman's, one of his podcasts recently, you were very good about sending people home for show trips because it was a
Well, it wasn't a one-way ticket. It was a two-way
I don't
ticket.
mean it that way, but it was that, it was when we got to see parents, we got to see relatives,
Exactly.
we got to see friends.
Yeah.
Many times we stayed at our parents' houses, which saved money. Yeah. We had a native familiarity with the dealers already.
And strong contacts.
Yeah. So it was truly a wonderful win-win situation. Plus, the way travel worked in those days, you got reduced fares with a Saturday night stay over.
We were going to do anyway.
Right. So it was truly a wonderful situation. And the thing with Mike and Ernie, we talk about them being good people. They were both reasonably high up selling oil and gas. So they both were very successful.
In their careers.
Right. They were both very successful.
Sales executives or whatever they were, yeah.
And so they didn't have to worry about, if they took no money in at the show, it wasn't going to affect their life any. If they had a great show, all it means is they had a better dinner to take their significant others out and their family out to dinner.
No, I had a lot more interaction with Mike Gallela than I did with Ernie because Ernie was more doing his plaques and things like that, where Mike was more a student of the hobby. It seemed like we had a lot of conversations about late 40s, early 50s distribution of cards, and he was very knowledgeable, passionate, and he was more of a card collector, would you say?
He was definitely a card guy. In fact,
and Ernie was more of the
memorabilia
display and presentation and memorabilia.
And Mike, I used to go to his house I used to take a day or two each summer for about, in the 80s, 4, 5, 6 years. And I used to go down to his house for a day or two just to hang out, get out of where I was. It was like a nice vacation, and he could do his work from home. He was ahead of his time in doing remote work. He could do his work on the phone, so he didn't have to go to an office. And he had a swimming pool. So it was.
Well, there you go. Well, I think he's older than me, but not way older than me. Enough that when he was talking about 51 Bowmans and 50 Bowman and 49 Bowman and stuff like that, he probably collected those.
He did.
I think he'd be pushing 80 now.
Yeah, and he would show me his backup stock of football cards, and he had an awesome inventory. He was really the first full-time, when I say full-time, he didn't do it for a living, but he was really the first, basically, football primary dealer I knew.
And so did Jerry Hirsch pick up after Ernie?
I think Jerry Hirsch
Mike?
picked up just a little after Mike did. And so those two were the first two. In fact, before one show, Mike Gallela goes and shows me these 263 Fleer sheets. One that has Adcock on it, one that has the checklist on it. It's the same sheet, but except that those two cards changed, which is the ultimate proof.
The ultimate verification of what we suspected. We did suspect that, but otherwise, why would Joe Adcock be special in 63 Fleer?
But that's right. So we got the ultimate verification. And Mike was such a sweet guy. And I miss him to this day. And I was researching an article when I was writing for Sports Collectors Daily. And I Googled Mike Gallela just to make sure I spelled his name correctly. And he had passed away like 3 days before that. Yeah. So and I saw the obit and it was very depressing. And Mike was truly a good guy. And I tell the story. He used to wear these sneakers that had these flaps. What he would do is every time he'd get a $50 or $100 bill, he put the bills in, I guess the sneakers had like little pockets in them. So if someone robbed him, they wouldn't get the really big bills.
Is that a statement about his neighborhood? I don't know.
It
Wow,
could
Rich.
be.
Tough crowd around Philadelphia.
The George Washington Motor Lodge in
Was a tough. How many stars do you think that would get?
Can we give it a -5?
I think it was under construction.
I once went on a trip the weekend after a Willow Grove show in '88, and I went with a friend of mine, and we were doing. It was like 3-4 days in New England, buying, selling, at all these various stores and shows. And we get to this hotel. It's a nice hotel. As it turned out, the lady that was the general manager or manager happened to be behind the counter, and she was from Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And I explained to her, look, ma'am, I just need a hotel. And I just need a room. I just spent 3 nights at the George, and the minute she heard the words George Washington Motor Lodge, we have a suite ready for you right now. It went.
Please don't. Imagine if Yelp and those things had been available in those days.
Oh my God!
Digital ratings. It was truly no stars,
yeah.
And yet. I hit those shows probably at least annually. It was 2 or 3 times, probably 2 times a year when it was in Willow Grove. But there were some amazing deals that took place in the rooms, in the convention, in the hall, which was not a huge hall. That was the place where the 52 mantles were auctioned off successively back in
to Rob Cohen for $3,000 each.
Amazing, and I was there. How smart am I? But at any rate, I don't think I had that much money in my pocket at the time.
By the way, 2 years later, the mantle was $500 at the same auction. So you could have bought it for $500 a couple of years later.
But at any rate, there were these rows. It was a motor lodge, so there would be these rows of simple, basic rooms, and in some of the rooms there were some big deals going on. Dealers.
That was where the real show was.
That was where,
And then about Ernie, I love one of our teammates, Theo Chen. There's a guy from my hometown named Joe Cunningham. He's the only major player. He's the only Major League Baseball player ever from my hometown of Saddlebrook, New Jersey. I sent Theo up with 20 different Joe Cunningham cards. So go see Ernie Montella. Tell him it's from me. Give him my address. Are you sure? Just do that. Just do what I tell you, and you're good to go. He hands the cards to Ernie. Ernie says, "Oh, I know what to do." And Ernie found an 8x10 signed photo of Cunningham. He found some of those like 65 little pennant tops things. Made a really nice plaque. If I get buried with any sports collectible, it will be the plaque Ernie Montella made for me. And he was really proud of the work he did on it.
Well, you got the feeling that all of his works were works of love, that they were carefully fashioned. And Mike Gallela, again, not as artistic, but somebody that really cared about the hobby and the people.
Do you remember the publication Mike Gallela did in the mid-'80s on football cards?
What was the title of it?
I don't remember the title, but he did it with Mike and Howie Gordon and someone else. Maybe it was Jerry Hirsch. And they talked about
ahead of its time, but still.
It was way ahead of its time. It was informational. Yeah. It was really cool. And there was one of the great lines I ever read about the hobby. The only thing harder than finding this card is finding a person who wants to buy this card.
That is a statement of how you determine value on tough, ugly cards sometimes. Yeah, again, a lot of nice. My first recollection of the Philadelphia show was I'd had some trades with Ted Taylor, who was Bob Schmear's. I don't think Bob was Ted's partner at first.
Right.
And then Ted was Bob's partner, and then Ted left. But Ted was, I think, a PR guy at Spring Garden College. Right. And the first shows were at Spring Garden College.
Until
I went to the second one, I think, which maybe it was 1975. And I sent him my money for a table. I drove to Philadelphia from Bowling Green. I get there, and whoever's the manager of the show, Ted's nowhere to be found, and we don't have any record of your table. This is in the halls, and that's not in a big room. It's a bunch of rooms at this very small college in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And so I'm sitting there with my satchels of cards. Didn't have monster boxes in those days, some shoe boxes. And I think, what am I going to do? And so I wound up going into it wasn't the, what would that be? Not the janitor's shed or something, but I found a slab of wood that I put over top of 2 desks and put my cards on top of it and stood up the whole time as people came by. But even then, and again, it was totally a show and a hobby of nostalgia at the time, because all I had were 75. So you had cards from 75 and back. And so it didn't take up a lot of room, but I needed a table. I needed a surface. And I remember some of the veteran dealers of the day were remarked about my resourcefulness to create a table where none existed. But there were customers, they spent money. That was always a good show. And it went from it quickly outgrew Spring Garden, moved to the notorious George Washington Motor Lodge in Willow Grove, and then moved up to Fort Washington, which was the Expo Center. And then that came under, and I went there a bunch of times. That was huge. It had additional capacity, I
Yes.
think. And then did that get torn down or rehabbed?
Something happened.
Something happened.
And they moved to Valley Forge.
And they moved to Valley Forge, which has a nice ring to it, but I think it kept getting farther and farther out.
It did. And the thing with Valley Forge is at one point, Mike Gallela and Mike Gordon and a couple other people, maybe 86 or 87, they made a bid. It wasn't a really successful bid to run the National at the Valley Forge Convention Center. So it finally got to host big shows just about 15, 20 years after you would have thought it would have been a big show.
Well, Bob Schmear has since exited.
Yes.
Who ran it with, he ran a tight ship.
He ran a very tight ship.
I think we can say that. And I don't have a lot of enemies in this world, but if he would be one I wouldn't want to have as an enemy, because he had his rules, and I don't think he was capricious about his rules, but he had his rules. He broke his rules. You were going to be out for, you're going to either miss a show or he had a waiting list, I think.
He had a huge waiting list. And you would always release, at least for a few years, the annual baseball card book the weekend of the Willow Grove show.
That probably was in deference to the very first one. That was the very first weekend of the very first Price Guide book was released at Willow Grove.
By the way, the white cover is much tougher to get than I believe the brown cover of that book. If you ever see,
why are you telling me that, Rich?
I'm telling that for the listeners.
I'm aware of that, but what happened was the white cover was done first. Denny commissioned that with a local artist that he knew. Wasn't gorgeous or anything, but it was what we self-published, and that sold out that first weekend.
Wow!
And at that point, so instead of going back to press with the same thing, we had a strong connection with Bill Dodge in the Cleveland area, who was a publishing executive, and he said, "You guys need to come with me, and I can take this thing to the next level." And so he created Edgewater Books, which was done shortly after that. And then he said, "I'm going to get a professional cover," hence the brown cover. And yes, he did print more of them. You've now blown the whistle on that, Rich. But
I think
the white cover's tougher, but more. But here's the thing that's strange about hobby distribution. The white cover was scarcer, but it's like hobby and retail. That was the hobby cover, and so more of those white covers went into the mainstream of the hobby, whereas the brown covers were the bookstores, because it went into the bookstores. And so maybe not all those were saved.
It took me longer to get a white cover than a brown cover.
They're less. They're 1/3 as many. So now I'm revealing these things. I don't know why I should worry about revealing secrets.
It's 40 years later, Jim.
I don't think
Jim,
people are
it's 40 years.
There's going to be a run.
Yes, it's 40 years later. And you know what? Other than people like you and me, I don't think too many people really care, other than it's fun to know the reasoning thereof.
Who's slabbing books these days? I'm not aware of anybody slabbing books. They're slabbing magazines, though. I do have some first copies of the Baseball Monthly that are slabbed, and I regret slabbing them now. You can't open them up and look at them, but again, that's...
Yeah, but there's reprint copies of the first magazine,
there are
so you
reprint
can always
copies
look at
now,
that.
so that's also fully revealed, and I hope nobody gets fooled by that. Anyway, thanks, Rich. Thanks, listeners. Little walk down memory lane. Two great guys who passed away in the last 7 years, Ernie Montella and Mike Gallela. I guess they rhyme a little bit. And smiling faces when we were in Philadelphia at that really outstanding show, which we also enjoyed. And it lives on. So thanks, everybody. Be back again tomorrow with another episode.
The man